The Voces Oral History Center started in 1999. Originally, it was dedicated to the World War II generation of Latinos and Latinas. The reason? At the time, there was not a single book about the remarkable contributions of this greatest generation. Instead, they had been routinely left out of books and movies. And yet, those early interviews revealed a depth of experiences. You could write a book about any one of those men and women. Since its earliest days, Voces has been national in scope, pan-Latino in reach, and inclusive. We have made sure to interview civilians, as well as men and women in uniform, because all those interviews tell of the broader impact of war. Families and communities were also deeply touched. Over the years, as resources became available, Voces expanded, first to the Korean and Vietnam War periods, and then to various collections, political and civic engagement, professions and careers, culture. Most recently, we have led several other universities in an initiative called Voices of a Pandemic, chronicling the Latino experience in the U.S. during this ongoing worldwide crisis. Once the interviews have been recorded, they are deposited in the world-famous Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection on the UT campus, making sure that the utmost care is taken to preserve the materials. Voces has produced 5 books on the Latino World War II experience. It publishes an annual journal to promote the use of oral history. The interviews themselves are used in several ways: newspaper, magazine, television, and radio stories, in educational guides and materials. Voces photographs are resources for posters and flyers. Documentarians know to look to Voces for its vast collection of over 25,000 digitized photographs. In 2018, Voces partnered with Google to create an online display. We advocate for the inclusion of the Latino perspective in various venues. In 2007, for instance, Voces took a leadership role in protesting a Ken Burns World War II PBS documentary that excluded any Latino perspective. Eventually, Burns relented and included some interviews with Latino and Native American vets. But there were larger effects. PBS greenlighted documentaries about Latinos and other minorities in the wake of the protests. A few years ago, some Voces interviews were used in an augmented reality installation in Austin. An AR installation is not something Voces staff would have conceived of 2 decades ago. Ryan Lynch, the head of special collections at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection, says all the Voces materials will continue to gain in value.
50 years from now or 20 years from now, so it will become an increasingly important record. It really will at some point become a pretty incredible corpus.
And there is something else. Those interviews and photographs, used in so many ways, including our website, inspire people to take a deeper look at their communities, at their neighbors, at themselves. That inspiration is hard to quantify, but it is very much one of the best and most important things that Voces does.
Good evening. My name is James Aldrete, and on behalf of the entire Voces Resource Council, we want to welcome you for joining us for tonight's celebration and memorial tribute. I hope you were inspired as I was by that introductory video, and it's just a reminder of the importance that our nation's history has to reflect the full contributions of all its citizens, especially the Latino and the Latina contributions. Tonight, we get to honor 6 members of the Voces family whose lives we've lost in the past year. But each one of them made huge contributions, either in uniform and as citizens. And each one of them shared their memories and their stories with our oral history archives. You'll also hear in a moment from our director, Dr. Maggie Rivas Rodriguez, about another dear friend that we lost here in the past week. But 30 years ago, Arnold Garcia Jr. lifted up the spirits of my family when he wrote an obituary for my father in 1991. And in it, he wrote that it's a reminder that taps are being sounded more and more for those gallant members of the GI generation. And to think that that was 30 years ago which makes me all the more thankful that Voces is here to capture the stories of those unsung heroes and legacies walking among us. In Arnold's spirit, tonight's celebration really is not about sadness or grief, but it is about gratitude. Gratitude for their contributions, gratitude for the generosity of their families, for sharing their memories and sharing their stories, and gratitude that their voices will live on because they have shared their stories, and we can have that to educate and inspire for generations to come. Over the course of the evening, we're going to be sharing stories, sharing memories, especially from family members and the researchers who interviewed, years ago, these 6 honorees. Then we're going to dip back into the archives and revisit some of these video clips where the honorees will talk directly about their experiences. I think that's going to be a special part of it. We're also, because it's a celebration, we're going to have 2 musical performances performed by Mariachi para Todos, which is a project of Austin Sound Waves, which was a philanthropical cause very dear and personal to the heart of one of our honorees, Dr. Teresa Lozano Long. Finally, we are incredibly grateful for a special guest here with us tonight, UT Board of Regents member, Dr. Nolan Perez, who will share his own personal reflections. Whether you're a longtime member of the Voces family, or this is your first time being introduced to the archives and the history and the work really that's been a passion project for years for Dr. Maggie that's enriching our nation's history, we want to welcome you again and thank you for joining us here tonight. If over the course of this tribute, or later on upon reflecting, that you feel called to help ensure that our story is told, that the Latino and Latina contributions to the fabric of our nation's history is there for generations to come, I hope you'll consider making a financial contribution to support the work of Voces. Just please visit isupportvoces.org. It's isupportvoces.org. One last expression of gratitude before we pass it on to Dr. Maggie, but on behalf of the entire Voces Resource Council, we want to say a special thank you to the individuals, the families, and the sponsors who have made tonight's program possible. I'd like to thank the Galindo Caballero family, who supported in honor of Ramon G. Galindo and the Pauline S. Endowment. I'd like to thank Guillermo Nicolas in memory of his mother, Irma Cortez Nicolas. Also, Laura and Javier De Luca in memory of Irma Cortez Nicolas. The Voces Resource Council came together in special memory for our dear friend Arnold Garcia. I'd like to thank the De Los Santos familia in honor of their parents. Also, VRC members Lupe and Joe Marin in memory of Corporal Pedro Leal Caballero, killed in the Korean War. I'd like to thank David and Susie Oliveira and the Merck Company in honor of David's father, Dr. Arnulfo Oliveira. I'd like to thank friends of Judge and Mrs. Virgilio Roel, RGD Property Holdings, LLC, and Angela Duran in memory of Rosario Rabbit Duran, as well as Laura Skinner in memory of Virgilio Roel. And today also we had an additional one of Debbie Hyatt, who made a contribution in honor again of Arnold Garcia Jr. And then we've also wanted to thank Austin Sound Waves for bringing us Mariachi para Todos and helping make this a very special tribute. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Rivas Rodriguez. I'm the director of the Voces Oral History Center. I'd like to start out by acknowledging Arnold Garcia Jr., who passed away this week. He was someone who was a Vietnam veteran, and we interviewed Arnold many years ago. He was so inspired by what we were doing that he ended up becoming an interviewer himself, and his specialty, because he was the editorial page editor of the Austin American-Statesman for 22 years, a trailblazing pioneer of journalism here in Austin, but even more broadly among Latino journalists, he's someone that everyone looked up to. Arnold became an interviewer, and then he also joined our resource council. He is going to be very sorely missed, and our deepest sympathies to his family and his legion of friends and supporters across the country. But we can take some comfort from knowing that Arnold's memory is going to live on because of that interview that we conducted many years ago. And he understood the importance of that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why oral history is so important to telling the Latino and Latina story. You know, we've been doing this for 22 years now. Many years ago, in 2002, we were doing interviews in Los Angeles at a vet center. And I explained to folks why we were there. And at the end, one of the vets lifts his hands and says, my question is, why is it that we don't see Latinos and Latinas in our World War II movies over and over again. We just get completely omitted. And I said, that is a one question, and we could be here for the entire summer just talking about that and looking at some of the reasons. But what I can tell you is that what we're doing now in capturing your stories is we're ensuring that there's going to be a chance that those movies are going to include Latinos. And I've got to tell you that it's actually happened. We had a few years ago, we had a Hollywood producer contact us, had stumbled on our website and wanted to know more about Latinos working in tank battalions during World War II in Europe. So those interviews really do get used by people in all kinds of different ways. James mentioned his father, Chris Aldrete. Now, what he didn't say, because he's kind of modest, but Chris Aldrete was a very, very important figure in Mexican-American civil rights. He was an attorney, he championed civil rights, and he made sure to try to advance the cause so that we have some of the opportunities that we have today. It wouldn't have happened without that World War II generation. And the Aldrete family was very, very smart about depositing their dad's archives at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin America collection here at the UT campus. And so historians who want to learn more about what the GI Forum did to advance the cause will be able to look up Chris Aldrete's papers. So the truth of the matter is, though, that most of us don't have papers and letters and diaries that we deposit in archives that they will be publicly accessible to researchers in years to come. And so that's why oral history is so important and vital to telling the Latina and Latino story. If it's not recorded in some way, either in writings, an autobiography, memoirs, letters, diaries, or in an oral history recording, the world will never know that something happened. And so that's why oral history is so important. It's really trying to retrieve those memories before they're gone. Without oral history, I can tell you, we would never have been able to write the 5 books that we've been able to produce. And there's been several dissertations and other research that's been conducted because of that. If we want to see those books, we have to write them ourselves, or we need to provide the tools for other researchers to write them. And that's why oral history, preserved professionally and put in a central archive, is so important to telling the Latino-Latina story. Now, the importance of the interviewers in oral history is not something that I can overstate. And I'm going to give you an example. I interviewed my father in 1999. He was a World War II veteran who had been stationed in the Aleutian Islands, and he was very, very proud of his military service. In fact, in 1992, 7 years before the interview, he and I had gone to the Aleutian Islands, and we had retraced his steps and seen some of the pillboxes that had been built into the hills. So we had a really pleasant time in 1992. And then 7 years later, I'm interviewing my dad, and he's telling me about seeing the Japanese Zeros, the airplanes, strafing the island at Dutch Harbor. And so the camera goes off, and I look at him and I said, Daddy, you and I went to Dutch Harbor in 1992, and you never told me that you saw the Japanese Zeros strafing the island. Why is that? And he says, Mija, you never asked. And that's why interviewers are so important, because we do ask. And we ask the follow-up questions. We make sure that we can understand that experience as well as we possibly can. And in the process, those experiences transform the people that are conducting the interviews, as well, as you're going to hear from some of these videos. Without more to say about this, I hope that you'll enjoy the following tributes that we prepared for you. Thank you.
Your name.
Okay, my name is Ramon G. Galindo.
Where are you from and where you were born?
Okay, I was born May the 29th, 1921 in Mexico.
Hola, my name is Marta Mendez Cross, and I attended the University of Texas at Austin, 1998 to 2002, and took a wonderful journalism class. where I got a chance to help capture oral history of Latino World War II veterans, and had the opportunity to interview Ramon Galindo, a Latino World War II veteran, back in September 2000. Oh my gosh, I'm getting older. It was a long time ago. How long did you live in Mexico?
Well, my father and mother moved back to Austin back in 1922, so I was really 1 year old.
Okay. So you grew up in Austin?
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Josie Galindo Caballero, and I am the daughter of Ramon Gracia Galindo of Austin, Texas. And my father was one of a kind, not just to me, but to many people who ever had the opportunity to cross his path. If you were able to call him a friend, you were very lucky.
It was an experience that impacted my life. And one thing that I remembered is that he said one of his passions was being a magician and performing and bringing smiles to children and adults alike, because who doesn't like magic?
He lived an extraordinary life. He had very special talents of being a magician, of being a tailor, of filming. He loved to, when he finally started talking about the war, which was 50 years after World War II, he loved every minute of it because people were interested in hearing his experiences.
I said, let's enlist. So when we got there, he said, well, I already signed my papers. Did you sign yours? I said, yes. The recruiter looked at the papers and says, I can take your brother Tom, but I can't take you. I said, what do you mean you can't take me? He said, no, you're not an American citizen. Why do you want to go right now? And I said, well, my brother's in there, all my friends are there in the armed services. He said, well, we have you want to leave tomorrow? And I said, no, give me a couple of weeks and I'll take off. So that's the way I got into the army.
My father never talked about the war, but when he finally started talking about it, it was like the dam had been released. Ramon Galindo was the only one of the three brothers that would really talk about his experiences. And anybody that would listen, he was so glad to share his experiences with them, good and bad.
You know, he stressed on following your dreams. He stressed on the importance of family and happiness. And, you know, when you talk to someone who you end up having great respect for, you know, they implant little seeds. And at the time, I was still unsure of my path. It ended up being one of those aha moments that allowed me to be okay with pursuing that might have been something outside of my degree. So pursuing acting.
So I don't think he saw himself as anything other than just Ramon Galindo, somebody who came back from the war and wanted to make a good, clean life for himself and his family.
So I had a good life. I've been blessed. I sure have.
At that time, even getting to college was very hard. You had to prove, you had to have character references. You had to, I mean, they would put a stop. They would put all kinds of barriers. They didn't want you. That's the way life was at that time.
I'm Laura Santos Ferry. My mother was Lita de los Santos. We were a family of 6, and I am smack in the middle of my family. I had an older brother and older sister and 3 younger brothers. My mom had a huge legacy, and I remember talking to her towards the end of her life that what she left behind, you know, she contributed a lot to this program about the Hispanics in World War II, but she also, you know, written several books, and her legacy is that she was such a good storyteller.
So many stories, and that's what I'm writing about, putting this down, that the war causes these things, not just what happens over there in the front, but what happens at home.
She had so many stories, and I remember when I was in high school, she would tell me these stories and I'd say, Mom, write them down. There's too many. My mom was a family of 16 kids and 8 brothers that went off to World War II at the same time. I couldn't keep up with them. I didn't know who was who. And I said, you need to write them down because there's no way I was going to remember all this.
My name is Raquel Garza, and I interviewed Lita de los Santos in 2008. I was the project manager. At the time, it was the U.S. World War II Latino and Latina World War II Oral History Project. I remember going to interview Lita in her home. She was actually very gracious in allowing us to interview her there. I remember she had photos, I believe, with her brothers who had served at the time.
To me, what I thought was just so interesting, and to this day, I'm in awe of what it was like for the families that were left behind.
I had a big map of the world in the wall in my front room. And that's where we would know. We'd say, well, this is where Kano is and this is Cerny is. And so my mother would, again, the old-fashioned way, she'd send her blessings every night to wherever she could, wherever they were.
I can only imagine what that must have been like to have all 8 of her brothers out and fighting and not have information. You know, we're so used to these days, like being the phone and just text someone, or, you know, even be on a video call, like instantaneously. But, you know, having to rely on a letter that might not reach you for like weeks and weeks. I thought that was really powerful.
The resiliency, you know, I think that is one thing that my cousins and I and my siblings always talk about, is resiliency of that family, of those women, that they did what they needed to do. And it was mainly the women that were having to do this because all the men were gone. Women that they just did what they needed to do.
We didn't know any Mexican teachers or doctors or lawyers. I mean, it was understood that we couldn't go beyond that. You went to high school and that was the end of that. That's as far as you could go. There was no incentive, no help whatsoever to go any further. I eventually later went back to school, got my GED and went to junior college and college. I even went to UT here for a couple of years. But
how old were you when you did all of that?
Oh, I was growing up and married.
Okay.
I am glad that we were able to interview her, because no matter what happened, you know, one of the best aspects of the project, these are some really strong and like incredibly capable people that lived during a very difficult time.
My kids are all high school graduate and college graduate. They have their career people. They are, and I'm very proud. That was the one thing I wanted for them, is to get a good education, and thank God they all have. But that is a second generation. See, and now the third generation is even going further. All of my grandchildren. It was hard.
Yeah.
But I feel that it made us stronger people.
My name is Lupe Morin, and I am a member of the Voces Resource Council. Austin Sound Waves is a nonprofit organization in Austin that was the vision of Dr. Teresa Lozano Long. As a founder, her commitment was to make music education accessible and equitable for all, especially for our youth. Dr. Long's vision, her legacy, lives with all of Austin Sound Waves music programs. The Mariachi para Todos program, in particular, brings together our youth and intergenerational musicians to promote culture and the love of music. And now, I'm proud to present El Mariachi para Todos. Enjoy.
Que Laurel We learned our perfect Spanish from my parents. And they would always say, when you go to school, you can always learn English, which now they contradict themselves, that if we learn our Spanish first, that we would never be able to read or write in English or learn is not true, because that was our language. And that's why we're Mexican Americans, and I'm so proud to be a Mexican American. I don't claim anything else.
In the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, speaking Spanish was not popular. It was frowned upon. In the late 50s, it was banned in Texas in public schools. And we all seen the signs: no dogs or Spanish, no dogs or Mexicans. We were always below the dogs.
It is a great honor to stand here today, 60 years after my father started the first full-time Spanish language radio station, KCOR AM 1350 on the dial. And 50 years later, after the first full-time Spanish language television station, KCOR TV, Channel 41 went on the air in San Antonio, Texas. My father would be very proud to know he was a part of history and of building something so deeply important to our Hispanic community all over this great country.
My father, Emilio Nicolas, was one of the three founders of what is now Univision. My grandfather, Raúl Cortés, was the founder and pioneer of Spanish language radio and television in the United States. And they were not going to fail, because if they failed, not only would they not have anything to support their family with, but more importantly, they were going to fail for, in their minds, an entire people.
Having a station gave us a platform on which to help our people. It was and is an important tool in helping to effect change.
My mother's legacy is part of all of that. My father could not have ever accomplished the things that he did without his partner of 67 years. I have no doubt about that. He and Mom were so proud of San Antonio and dedicated to it that they built the center of operations for the television network in San Antonio, not New York, not Miami, not Los Angeles.
Hi, my name is Dr. Laura Barberena, and in 2012, I interviewed Irma Nicolas while I was a graduate student at UT Austin. Today, I'm a political consultant in San Antonio, Texas. But what I remember about that interview is the way Irma held herself. She had such elegance and grace, and she remembered so many details of her life growing up.
It was my pleasure as a young lady to have worked with my father as his girl Friday. I loved selling $5 spots on the radio to husbands that wanted to serenade their wives and mothers on Mother's Day.
Latinos don't get credit for a lot of the pioneering efforts that we've made. Women don't get any of the credit for having been vital and integral parts of those men's lives and of their success. And my grandmother, Genoveva Valdez Cortés, and my mother, Irma Alicia Cortés Nicolas, were integral parts of that business and of that philosophy and of the decency and the kindness and the perseverance that it took to build that business and to not be discouraged by decades of bigotry and racism.
And I felt at the time that I was really capturing history of Latino media in a way that had never been captured before. She shared stories about her husband, her father, and it was such a privilege to be able to sit down with her for an extended period of time to do this interview.
The Latino youth of this country needs to know about all of us that have accomplished something. I think we have to let our youth know that we are business people, we are politicians, we are lawyers and doctors who have accomplished great things. We can't just be the sum of one or two people.
From the Bracero program between Mexico and the United States in the 40s to immigration reform today. The airwaves do belong to our people of our nation, no matter what language they prefer, and it has been a great honor to have served all of our public. Muchas gracias y Dios los bendiga.
My name is Virgilio G. Royel, and I was born in Laredo, Texas on June 2nd, 1922. I'm 77 years old. My parents were born in Mexico. They were both school teachers. My father was also a justice of the peace in Guerrero, Mexico, but he had to leave overnight during the revolution and come back into the United States.
We went into part of the Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge I'm talking about, and it was very, very, very cold. You were in a trench, of course, shooting people, and but in the confusion, of course, of shooting and being shot at, some poor guy, your unit stands up, trying to look better, and then of course he gets shot because he gets his head out, and this is the first time that you see a live young man dying, and all kinds of thoughts come through your mind.
My name is Laura Skinner, and I'm the eldest of 4 children of my dad Virgilio and mom Emilia Roel. We lost him November of 2020, and so it's been kind of a transition. He was very proud of the fact that he was able to make his way from very modest means to quite an accomplished profession, and he valued education so much.
Life was very hard. Like I said, I started working since I was 8 years old, and all the way through high school. But I think it gave me great advantage, and great more motivation for future life.
Just the idea that you could really become educated and set goals and reach them. And he also would want to be remembered for helping people, being a true advocate for minorities. Not just Latinos, but primarily, Mexican Americans.
What made me want to be an attorney was that I could see before, and especially after coming back to the war, the way that some of our veterans and some of our people were being treated, and that we had not made the social and economic advances that I thought, we would have made.
He worked as an attorney and a judge, and so he was very compassionate and based all his decisions on a sense of justice and equity all the time.
They wouldn't hire a woman that had pregnant out of wedlock. And there used to be very few Mexican Americans and minorities in the higher levels. So one of the conditions that I had set with the Postmaster General before I accepted the job was that we try to recruit more minorities. Unless we do something about this, I'm going to send this case to the Department of Justice.
I think his legacy is his devotion to a cause which was all about equality and making the world a better place, and using his profession, his profession as a lawyer and a judge to really implement those changes, the affirmative action and the cases that he decided on in those federal agencies. I mean, those were really things that he really made an impact on, and it was all based in this drive, this desire that he had to really work on behalf of Mexican Americans specifically to make a change in the world for the better. And he did it at the highest possible levels.
Mr. Roel's suggestion for the project was that for part of the editorial process to be the subject actually reviewing their own story before it goes to print, which was a great idea because we're able to ask follow-up questions. So before, they never saw their story, the subjects never saw their story until it was in the newsletter or the newspaper at that time. That really did change the project at that point. And it's been part of the process almost since the beginning because of his suggestion.
If Mexican Americans and Hispanics are going to be the biggest majority in this country very soon, we have to educate our people so that we become the governors, not the governed. so we, become part of the upper echelon, in education and in politics and in government, treating others, equal, not necessarily turning to treat others as they used to treat us, but to treat everybody as American.
Wasn't that moving? So inspiring. So many great stories that are being told this afternoon and evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Oliveira, and I am a member of the Voces Resource Council. I have been for several years. This is a project that's very dear to my heart because of the stories that are being told. I've been a member of the media for the past 40 years, and I always saw that mainstream media, Hollywood, television, newspapers, whatever it might be in the written word, that not enough of the contributions of Latinos and Latinas was ever being mentioned, not just for Latino history, but for American history and all the contributions that we have made during that time. Maggie and her team over the past 20 years have done an outstanding job recording those contributions. There are so many, many stories that still remain to be told. You're probably watching right now at home saying, after seeing Mr. Roel and Galindo and the others that were in there, wow, they should come interview my tia. They should come interview my abuelito. And we understand that. And that's why we're celebrating this Voces Lives On, because we want Voces to live on for many, many years and for future generations to see about their past and the Latinos and Latinas that contributed to American history. So as James said earlier, your contribution will be good, but we also want your support by spreading the word about what Voces does for not just Texas. These aren't just stories that are recorded in Texas, by the way, folks. The Maggie and her team have gone to other states throughout the country to record Latinos and Latinas over there too. So please help us spread the word. This is a wonderful University of Texas project, but it's obviously a model that could spread throughout the entire United States. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker and guest for today's Voces Lives On. He's University of Texas Regent Dr. Nolan Perez of Harlingen. Dr. Perez is CEO of Gastroenterology Consultants of South Texas, with offices in Harlingen and Brownsville, down in South Texas. Dr. Perez grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, where he graduated from Port Isabel High School. He received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Texas at Austin and a medical doctorate from the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. After medical school, he went on to serve in the U.S. Navy as a medical corps officer and received the Navy Commendation and Navy Achievement Medals. He has served as a member of the University of Texas System Board of Regents since 2019 and was recently reappointed to a 6-year term in April of 21. He has been serving also on the Harlingen School District Board of Trustees since 2010. Dr. Perez is also a member of the University of Texas System's Chancellor Council Executive Committee, the Texas Business Leadership Council, and serves on several business and medical boards all across the state. Dr. Perez, joining us now live from Harlingen. It is an extreme honor to have you with us here today, and I'm now turning over the virtual podium to you, Dr. Perez.
Muchas gracias. Es mi honor estar con ustedes hoy. Ron, thank you for your kind introduction, for your service on the Voices Resource Council, and for your work as a supporter of UT for many years. I know you've been an active member of your community, both in Austin and your hometown of Brownsville. For that, you have the gratitude of the Board of Regents and my personal thanks. As Ron said, I'm Dr. Nolan Perez, a member of the UT System Board of Regents and a son of the Rio Grande Valley. I've been honored to serve on the board since 2019, a time of tremendous growth, especially in the Valley. I'm proud to see that growth even in trying times. And much of that growth is thanks to the dedicated efforts of community members and leaders like all of you gathered here today. The Voces Oral History Center is a shining star in the constellation that makes up UT's most precious assets. Over the past 20 years, Voces has preserved the stories of Latinos and Latinas, including those who have served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, as well as those who fought here at home to help us live up to our principles of opportunity and dignity through the struggle for civil rights and the respect that comes with citizenship. Beyond that, Voces has shined its light on the lives of independent filmmakers, scholars, and academics, public school teachers, mariachis, healthcare professionals like me, and the list goes on. This work has assisted those dedicated to sharing our voices, our voces, through the StoryCorps Historias Project, several documentaries, and in partnership with the National World War II Museum. This September, the center's work will also be highlighted in a series of vignettes produced with KUT Public Radio in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. There is a fierce debate across the nation today about the teaching of history. It's a conflict that sometimes pits myth against scholarship. But there can be no real conflict where there is simply the truth. I think of the words etched into stone above the tower in Austin. Quote, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Or for that matter, consider the Latin words that ring the official seal of UT, which roughly translates to, quote, "The educated mind is the guardian of democracy." In particular, oral histories can enrich our understanding of the past and present and help us shape our future. It helps us shape our judgment and guide our decisions. This is especially true in communities whose stories have been rarely told in the mainstream. Our oral histories add context, texture, and detail, and help widen the horizons of what's possible for our children and generations to come. It's a mission well suited to UT. To give one small historical example, John Lomax, an 1897 graduate of UT Austin, is today remembered as a groundbreaking folklorist and musicologist. We have him to thank for our cultural memory of many cowboy songs like "Get Along Little Doggies" and others. But during the Great Depression, he recorded the stories, songs, and lives of African Americans, including many formerly enslaved people. His recordings are preserved in perpetuity at the Library of Congress and help keep alive the memory of communities whose culture might have otherwise been lost. I believe the work Voces continues to do today will help bolster, protect, and preserve our culture. For Latinos and Latinas, it may be one of the only ways our history gets written. For that reason, I extend a special thanks of the families of those who we're honoring for sharing their inspirational stories of perseverance, courage, and sacrifice. Your memories will light the way for future generations, and we stand on your great shoulders. For more than 20 years, Voces has been the passion project of Dr. Maggie Rivas Rodriguez. She receives no additional compensation for this work. If the Voces Center is a bright star, Dr. Rivas Rodriguez is the fire that keeps it burning. Maggie, thank you. Passion, of course, can only go so far, particularly in today's higher education environment. Unlike when I attended UT, institutions today rely more than ever on private philanthropy and the thoughtful insight of donors. For Voces to continue this vital, enriching work into the future, it will need a firm foundation. John Lomax relied on the support of the New Deal funding, but that is no longer an option for today's keepers of historical memory. That's why I hope you'll pay particular attention to the next presentation as Dr. Rivas Rodriguez announces a new special endowment fund that will help preserve the stories of Latinos and Latinas and shine their light for our children and our children's children. As you know, philanthropy is not just charity. It is investing in something that you believe in. So having said that, my wife Sandy and I would like to contribute $5,000 to this great cause. It's my sincere hope that others will feel inspired to join the effort to ensure that the history reflects everyone's contributions and that our voices live on. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all. Les mando muchos abrazos. Hook 'em.
Dr. Perez, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, first of all. I've not met you in person, but it's a delight to meet you, and I'm so glad to hear everything that you just said. You really get what we're doing here, and you really get the importance of it. And so often that's hard to convey to people, but you understand immediately. So thank you so much. Thank you to you and your wife for the donation, but importantly, thank you for being here and showing your support, because it speaks volumes. I would like to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
This past week, the U.S. Census has come out with some new figures that show that the Latino population of the country is growing exponentially, as we already knew. It's not a secret, it's not a surprise. here in Texas, we're a little bit over 39%, and some demographers feel that that's an undercount. What do you think institutions of higher education in the state of Texas need to do to prepare for that pipeline of young people coming in? And then secondly, what do you think that we in the Latino community can do to prepare the next generation of leaders?
Well, I appreciate, again, the opportunity to participate today, and thanks for these great questions. I think you're right. First of all, we already knew. Now this provides more context and more data to what we already knew was coming. You know, the faces of our young children down here in the Valley, the faces of most of the children there in Austin and San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and wherever you go, El Paso, around the state of Texas and much of this country. I mean, these faces are the faces of the future of Texas and the future of this great nation. So shame on us if we don't recognize that we have to be a part of providing them an education. You know, one of the things I like to say is, you know, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. We have to make sure that all these children, when they're 2, 3, 4 years old, we have to make sure they understand that anything's possible. You know, I came from Port Isabel, like was mentioned earlier. I grew up down here, and in fact, you know, I was blessed that I had one teacher that inspired me to become a physician. I wouldn't be a physician today if it wasn't for that one teacher that really became a mentor to me and inspired me to do that. And I think a lot of us have these kind of stories, but it's incumbent on us to reach back and to do that for others. You know, the other part you asked about leadership and what the university's role is. You know, I think the UT system is doing more and more. It can do more. It can do better. I know our presidents are committed to you know, inclusion and diversity. And I like to quote Dr. Peter Pisters from MD Anderson, where he says, you know, diversity is a fact, but inclusion is an act. And it's so true, but we have to do more, and we can't leave it to chance. So many times people are wondering, why don't we have, you know, minority applicants for this position or for that position? It's incumbent on us as universities, when they're students, to identify these leaders when they're students, and then graduate students, and then young faculty, and start to mold them into the leaders that we need for tomorrow. Because unless, in some of the videos you showed today, I mean, spoke to that. Until we get folks out there visible for these young students, to young children to see that, wow, it's possible. And that's what I tell students when I talk to students in middle school and high school, and certainly in universities. I tell them, like, if I could be a physician, if I can be here as a regent and other roles that I have, you can definitely do it, because it's just through work, through opportunity. But that's why I'm really happy to support Voces, because you telling stories and you know, giving great context to our beautiful culture is amazing, and I think it gives a lot of pride, and I think it will open the door of opportunity for our young children. But we have to do more as leaders in the UT system, and I can assure you the Board of Regents is committed to that, and I can assure you that our presidents and our institutions are committed to that. But we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you. Well, count me among your biggest supporters, and we're glad to do whatever we can. I know that Voces has been really important for teachers across the country. We get emails from teachers in places like Kentucky that say they had never had any Latino students, and then they turn around and they do half of their students are Latino. So they've stumbled on our website, and they're using these stories as curriculum building. So please know that we believe very strongly, and we can't wait until someone's in high school to be able to show them that they can go to college. We need to plant those seeds when they're in as soon as kindergarten, to let them see role models and people that look like them and who speak Spanish and who have the same kind of values and culture. They need to be able to see that so they can think about, this might be somebody I can be too. So thank you again, Dr. Perez. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Josie Galindo, whose family made a major donation so that they could establish the Ramon Galindo and Pauline Galindo Endowment to fund interns. And after that, we're going to hear a couple more of the final tributes, and then closing remarks from James Aldrete. Thank you all.
My family wanted to be able to do something that would live on in my parents' name. We loved my parents so much. They gave us so much. And my parents' time on earth had such more meaning than just making a good life and a home together. They were proud of their heritage. And they both agreed full-heartedly that the Voces Oral History Program was a treasure trove of valuable pieces of history from the community that needed to be highlighted for their contribution fighting for the American freedom that we all have today. The reason we went with the endowment was because even after I'm long gone and my children are gone, that endowment will still be living on in my parents' name. Even though my father was the one that was outgoing, he couldn't have done it without my mother. And she loved this program because my father would just beam every time he was interviewed. And it just made him feel so good that someone in the young generation wanted to hear his story from his experience in World War II.
In my neighborhood, there were a lot of guys. In my age group, I could outrun anybody in that neighborhood. At my age, maybe a year or two older, I was able to outrun everybody. And in Austin, Texas, I was probably one of the 10th fastest persons at that time, and in high school. So that's where I got my name mostly.
My name is Angela Duran. I am the daughter of Rosalio Duran, also known as Rabbit. I am the second to youngest child that Rabbit raised. There were 5 of us all together and 5 grandkids, 3 great-grandkids, and 1 more on the way. So he was always really super proud of his family.
We've always been in politics. My folks, my dad especially, my grandfather, and my uncle, they've always been in politics. And I grew up listening to them talk about different politicians back in the 50s and the 40s or whatever, you know.
My name is Katie Lutz. I interviewed Rabbit Duran when I was a student at the University of Texas in 2014. Mr. Duran was such a special individual. What I remember most about our interview was how passionate he was about Rabbit's Lounge and the importance of integration. Doing that interview really shifted my mindset about the impact someone can have on a community. You really can change the world, even if you're just one person.
At that time, we had lots of softball in Austin, Texas. We had a lot of teams on the east side, and they were all Latin, and Rabbit's was one of the only places to drink at. So I had all that business, and that's how I made it grow. And I got to know a lot of people, and all those people helped me in the politics. Politicians done it too also. A lot of the politicians started coming to ask for help. They would bring their friends, they would bring their supporters, and it just grew and grew and grew till there it was. Now there's the political place of Austin. Everybody got to go there to see about getting some help, and they did. I had started in 1967, and in '69 I moved to the corner of 6th and Chicon. And ever since then, till now, it's still there.
You know, he was always about helping people, and being behind a bar, I think it's pretty normal for, people to wander in and have a drink and tell you about what's going on with them and the issues that they're having and the difficulties that they're facing. And that's a normal thing you do when you go and sit at a bar, especially on a regular basis, right? Well, my dad wasn't just somebody that sat there and listened. When he heard that there was a need or, any opportunity to step in and help someone, he was a man of action. And he had a huge network, and he would not hesitate to call on his network. He knew who to call, when to call them, and exactly what to ask them for. So not only did he have just this huge heart for helping people, he also had the administrative skills to make whatever needed to happen.
Rabbit's Lounge opened like at 8 o'clock in the morning. I had all the construction workers that didn't work the day, or if it was raining or stuff, they didn't work, so they came. And some of the guys that didn't work at all, they came at 8 o'clock in the morning. And they stayed there till 3 or 4, 5 o'clock, and then they changed shifts. 5 o'clock, a different crowd came in from the state workers and what have you. And then at 8 o'clock, I got another group of people come. So it was all the time, somebody like shift work. Every day, all these people would come to Rabbits.
I distinctly remember Mr. Duran joking at the end of our interview about how he was going to have Rabbit put on his tombstone because that's what everyone knew him as. I really hope he is resting easy in heaven, knowing he was such an important figure in the Austin community who paved the way for huge change. It was a joy to interview him.
The World War II veterans started here. They encouraged their kids' generation. And now those kids' generations like y'all know it can be done. Know you can do more. Know that you can talk about your culture.
Hi, I'm Brenda Sendejo. I am faculty at Southwestern University. Currently, I'm in feminist studies. And I was fortunate enough to work with the Voces Project while I was a graduate student at UT Austin back in 2003 until 2008. And I was fortunate enough in 2004 to interview Teresa Lozano Long.
My parents always believed you had school every single day. And the best report card was one that would have 0 number of absent days, you know. And my mother insisted that the employees also send their children to school. And if she saw them outside playing, she'd go up and ask the mother right away, how come so-and-so is not in school today? Well, he's sick today. Well, how come he can go out and play? Make sure tomorrow he goes to school, get some clean clothes for him, and he's going to school. So that was the attitude of my parents.
So I was a little bit nervous at first going in, but she was so gracious. I will never forget. She sat us down and offered us, I think, some lemonade and just started talking to us very casually, very kindly.
Do you know that when I was in elementary school, there were no school cafeterias, and our sandwiches would be tortillas with beans or papas. Went to the back of the building or whatever, you know, to eat this. Well, now, when I go to these high society functions and I see what they're eating, I just laugh, and my husband will say, you're seeing all the Mexican food here? I said, can you believe they're paying that much for that kind of food? You go to Europe, believe it or not, Paris, London, they have Mexican-American restaurants.
It was really wonderful. I felt really inspired by that interview as a fellow Tejana of her stature, and also just she was very humble, but she was also very adamant with a lot of convictions about the pride she has in her culture and the importance of education, and connecting that to her South Texas upbringing, I think, was something that was really beautiful and just reminded me about the importance of this story.
My name is Nora de Hoyos Kamstan, and I have known Terry for a long time, but we became really close friends within the last 5 years, where we both just challenged the system to change the relationship to the Latino community.
On the way, I used to love to read, and that was the best time for me. I could read all the way to school, coming back home again, I'd be reading in the bus. And my father strongly believed in that we should learn to speak English and speak it correctly, because in those days, there were not many opportunities for the Mexican-American student to get a job after high school. Generally, they went back to working on the farms or ranches, that sort of thing. Very few of them would have a job, say, in the courthouse or places like that, where there would be some spaces available for them. And the reason that in our school, in our little town, that so many people spoke English and everything was because we were integrated. It was such a small school. And number two, the richest people there were Mexican Americans. So that made a difference, you know.
Her legacy is love. She loved the Mexicano, the South Texas Latino. She just, or Hispanic, she absolutely grew up there. The passion that she felt for the experiences that she went through herself with her family in the dairy farm, and what she saw the people around her, and what she was able to transform of her experience, what she and Joe pulled together, the things that they achieved, and how she was able to give back to the community from the love that she felt for them.
I share Voces stories with my students, and to this day, they're still really surprised that there's this thing called the Chicano movement, or that World War II, the Hanas had so much agency and were so active in creating social change and for their communities and their kids.
I'm just delighted that you're doing this about recording some of this past history. Within 15 years or so, the largest minority group are going to be Hispanics. I don't know whether it's Mexican American. I would assume they're Mexican Americans. I mean, in terms of the culture and this sort of thing. I think the doors are open now to where that the Hana can do just about anything she wants to do.
All agree that I think what we delivered tonight was everything we promised and more. For me, it was rather personal. I'll admit I made many of stops at the watering hole of Rabbit's Lounge in East Austin. My brothers and I had the opportunities to kind of sit and hear the stories of Judge Roel and of Teresa Lozano Long and Joe Long, part of my father's network, which we appreciated from hearing and learning from their wisdom. But I also just connected with the humanity of Mr. Galindo and the magic and the storytelling and the jokes and the kind of the bonds that he created. The storytelling, Mr. Los Santos, and I'll take this too from Irma Cortez Nicolas, that they would not allow themselves to fail. I think we had these inspirational stories of ganas and grit and drive, and it's just a reminder of how important it is that our nation's history tells the complete story. And for that, we're very thankful to Dr. Maggie, your whole team, and the work of the Voces Oral History Center. Also, a special thank you to all the families that helped share visual assets and share their stories and collections into the researchers as well. Thank you to Mariachi para Todos I was doing gritos during Los Laureles. And it was incredibly meaningful to have Dr. Nolan Perez, a member of the UT Board of Regents, for him and his wife, Sandy, to make that leadership contribution. I'm also inspired by Josie Galindo and her family for making that endowment. As I said from the beginning, but I hope it's more meaningful now, that if you feel called to follow their leadership steps in whatever dollar amount you're able to do, we want to make sure that our history tells the full story. And that means just simply supporting us and the work of Voces through isupportvoces.org. You can sign up today, join us tomorrow upon reflection, but please help keep these stories going. This is our history. This is our herencia. Voces can capture the stories, but it's really up to us as a community to ensure that Voces truly does live on. So please join us on that. Don't go away. We have one final presentation from Mariachi para Todos to end this evening. And after that, we'll be raising a glass to all of y'all. Thank you so much for joining us. Gracias.